Welcome to the Traveling Professors. I'm Professor Bob.
And I'm Professor Sherry.
And together we are
the Traveling Professors.
Today, Sherry and I are going to begin our tour of Amboise. Now, originally, I thought we could do the Chateau in one fell swoop. That isn't possible. It's way too long. So we're going to break it up into segments. So this first segment is going to be a little more of the history of the Chateau of Amboise and some of the early kings who were living there. And we're going to focus on the chapel of St. Hubert, which is where the body of Leonardo da Vinci is buried. And we'll talk about all sorts of things associated with the changes in the chateau as well, because it's a far different chateau today than it was during the Renaissance. Well, here we are floating over the Loire, heading towards the Chateau d'Amboise. Last time we did this with the balloon flight, I talked about how that area people had been living on it since the Neolithic time period. And then the Celtic tribe that moved into this was the Touronnes. And those were the people in this area that, of course, Caesar had fought. And, of course, he uses it as a center for supplies throughout the period. Around 300 AD, the first fortifications were put in to protect the residences. And then I mentioned about the fact that the island, the Ile d'Or, the Island of Gold, as it was called, and still is where you had the meeting between the king of the Franks and the king of the Visigoths. Well, that took place in 503 between Clovis, the man who unified the Franks, and Alaric, the Visigothic king. And they're the ones that used the Loire River as the dividing line between their two countries. And then what takes place is this fortress is going to be a political football for the rest of time, but particularly in the Middle Ages. Now again, to show you where it is on the map, here's the map. The central town right here is Amboise, and we're just going to be doing the chateau, the citadel. It was a city that was in competition with others. The city of Blois, up this direction off the map, and the city of Tours, down the other direction. So you have in the Middle Ages a nobleman and his family who controlled Tours. You have the people who controlled Amboise, and you have the people who control Blois. And so you really have these two families, the Counts of Anjou and the Counts of Blois, who will be manipulating everything around. That is until the kings get involved. And then here we have a closer view, and as you can see, we're just going to be up here in this green area right here. And you will be amazed at the difference between what it is now and what it has been and how it has changed. But today we're going to focus just a little bit on the little chapel that's up here, as well as the entrances in. You look at this picture with the bridge and the island. The reason it's called the Island of Gold is because you talk about money making in the Middle Ages. Remember, there are only a couple of bridges across the Loire during the Middle Ages. So you're taxing people for charging tolls to cross the bridge in either direction. In addition, all the shipping coming down, heading towards Tours and other places, or coming up from Tours, heading towards Blois, has to go through here. With the bridge there, it is really easy to stop the traffic and tax the cargo. So you're making plenty of money. Now the train station is just off the screen down here in this area right here. So Sherry and I came to Amboise to take some pictures. Now we've been here before. We've taken pictures of it in 2016. The problem is, in 2016, we were here for 5 days. It rained 4 of them, including the day that we went to the chateau. So we went back again to get sunny pictures. When we went back the second time, I didn't feel like I needed to take as many pictures. We're going to cross the bridge, and as we're crossing the bridge from the train station, it was foggy that morning, and you can see the fog coming up off the river with the sun rising and the chateau directly in front of us. And then by the time we get across the second part of the bridge, the fog is all gone, and you get this beautiful shot of the main chateau with all of its fortifications. Now, how has this changed over the years? Well, let's first look at the kings briefly. Now, we're only going to go to about Charles VIII. We'll pick up with the rest of the people as we get into different sections of the palace later on. After the Middle Ages, what we have is in 1214, Philip Augustus, which is King Philip II. He had a gentleman who was one of his vassals, and he was known as the Lord of Amboise. Then in 1431, Louis of Amboise made a mistake. Under Charles VII, now this is Charles VII, who was the man put on the throne by Joan of Arc, who he did very little to help rescue after she was captured, but that's another story. What happened is Lord Louis d'Amboise disliked Charles VII's good friend, La Tromille, and actually plotted against him. And he was caught. And initially, he was sentenced to death. But what ended up happening, he was ultimately pardoned in return for giving Amboise to the king. So it's under Charles VII that we have this facility coming into the hands of the monarchy. And it'll be in the hands of the monarchy or relatives for quite some time. Now, all that Charles VII really did to it is just added some outer buildings. His son, Louis XI, built a building for his wife that was not far from the keep. It's Charles VIII, who was king from 1453 to 1498, who added a lot of buildings. Charles VIII was born in Amboise, and he marries Anne of Brittany in 1481, and they're a great couple. He's the one who builds the church. He's the one who builds the church, the chapel of Saint Hubert. And it's spelled with an H, but the French don't pronounce it. It was done in 1493. He also built the Lodge of the Seven Virtues, which was for his wife. He'd been involved in a major war in Italy and brought back Italian artists and architects and just let them go wild. They created a Renaissance garden and began enlarging towers. And then here's an aerial shot of the entire facility. But even with being up in the air, it's really hard to get a feeling for just exactly what it looked like. Fortunately, in the museum, in the Chateau, they have a couple of nice models. And here is the model that shows Amboise in its magnificent form. So this would have started at this time period after Philip II, but particularly with Charles VIII. And it would have remained this way until the late 1700s, and this is what it looks like today. So you can see just how much was taken down. And as we go along, you'll find out why certain parts of this were taken down. But today we're just going to get in and look at where the chapel is located. Using the model, you can see that there's actually 4 ways of getting into the chateau. You come overland right up here and use the main gate. You could come up one of the towers right from here, and you could do this with a horse. You could come up from this other tower, where you can actually come up with wagons. Or you can come up this way, which is how most of the people come into the chateau today, and would have probably in the Middle Ages as well. So here we are, starting our way up to get into the Chateau of Amboise. Here we come to the ticket spot. Now you can tell this is pre-COVID, because when we were there this past year, you have people standing there and they check your pass sanitaire to make sure you have your vaccinations and you get your mask, and then they let you through. And when you get to the top, then you see the area where they put in modern bathrooms, and then you come around the corner, and this is what you would end up seeing. You would see the little church, the little chapel over here. And I want to show you the difference between the time we were there in 2016 and today. Here we have our picture with 2016. And this is what it looks like today. They've added a building because it's a concession stand, so you can have food and drink, so they can make a little extra money there. Let's head closer and go and visit the chapel. Now, this is a very small chapel that was designed for the king's wife to pray privately. And of course, it was, as I said before, it was built by Charles VIII, and it is flamboyant Gothic. It's obvious with all of the stuff that you can see here, the gargoyles and the tower. And the chapel was built in 1493. And it used to be part of a bigger building. It used to be part of the donjon. Then the donjon was torn down, but they kept the chapel. This is a little closer view of the wall where you can see the statues and you can see the gargoyles. And then here's a nice view of the tower. If you remember what Notre Dame looked like before it burned, with the giant spire in it, this is kind of a miniature version of it. Here we are standing directly in front of the church as we head in. And you can tell it's springtime, so this would be the 2016 visit, because the trees, as I always refer to as the angry trees, because they've been trimmed back and they have these little knobs which look like fists, are just starting to bloom. When we were back in 2021, it was fall, everything was still green. But just who is this Saint Hubert? Well, he was born in Toulouse. He's an actual person. He was born either in 656 or 658, and he died in 727, so he lived to be either 71 or 69. He did become the Bishop of Liège, but initially he was a royal courtier who lived a nice fancy life, having a good time. And then his wife died in childbirth. He just ended all of his royal duties. He just spent his time hunting all by himself. And the story goes that one day he's out hunting and he sees this magnificent stag with a crucifix between its antlers. And a voice tells him that he needs to mend his ways. And he became known as the Apostle of the Ardennes. And he did good works, and he became bishop, as I said before, died of old age. Now, he is a patron saint, obviously, of hunters. But he was venerated for the fact that it was believed that he was able to cure rabies. And the cure for rabies, according to the text, is known as you use Saint Hubert's key. It's a brand with a nail on the end of it of some sort. You would heat it until it was red hot and then apply it to the spot where the bite of the rabid animal was located. I would imagine once in a while it would work and once in a while it wouldn't. But that story of his conversion, if you will, is on this spot right here in the triphenum. They have this beautiful carving. So here's a little closer, so we get ready, and you can see the little carving here, but here's a close-up of it. And you can see the stag with the crucifix between its antlers. And there's also St. Christopher carrying the baby Jesus, and there's also St. Anthony with his pig. And then later on, you look up at the top of it, you see the Blessed Mother, but they added the king and the queen on either side. Now, the funny thing about this, in the 1800s, Gustave Flaubert loved this carving. Not the one with the king and the queen, but the one with Saint Hubert. And he actually thought about figuring out a way of stealing it, but it remains here. But it certainly is a stunning object to look at. As you come in the front door, here are the magnificent doors. I have a pair of these beautiful carved wooden doors. And then once you come in, it's relatively small, standing for this picture right dead center in the middle of the church. And it's a tiny little transept, so it's a small cross. So you have the main altar here, and then up above it is the beautiful stained glass. Now, the original stained glass of the Middle Ages, nobody knows what happened to it. In the 1800s, it was replaced with Savard stained glass. In 1940, during World War II, a group of soldiers staying here were fired upon by Nazi artillery, which blew out all the windows. The windows that you see here were reinstalled after World War II, and they're done by Max Ingrand. Now, believe it or not, a lot of times people come to the Chateau and don't go to the chapel. The main reason you go to the chapel is not necessarily anything that I've talked about at this point, but because of this picture right here. This is a little side chapel. And you see the floor, and you see the stuff on the wall, the beautiful stained glass window. There's a close-up view of the stained glass window. But this is the reason why you come and visit. This is where Leonardo da Vinci is buried. Now, when Leonardo da Vinci died in 1519, he had been granted permission by Francis I to be buried in the main church up here, St. Florentin. And he was buried in that spot. And he remained there until 1863. When he was exhumed, authenticated, and then moved to the chapel. And the reason they moved him to the chapel from where he was located is that the Church of St. Florentin was gone. A gentleman who had been given the site by Napoleon in the 1800s. He took the church down and most of the buildings down and sold it for stonework. And so he was buried in the crypt, and they were able to get him out of the crypt. So that is why you come in to see the Church of St. Hubert, the chapel of St. Hubert. Before we leave Leonardo and the chapel, let's look at some of the other parts of it. Here is a couple of the stained glass windows that are in the other side chapel and to the sides of the church. Beautiful, stunning. Here's what the floor looks like. You see the tiles. See how the closer to the edge you go, the better they are. If you go to chateaus where they have curtains by the windows, pull the curtain back to see what the original tiles look like, because in many cases the floors will be completely clear of any detail, but behind the curtains they're perfect. And then here's the view looking out the two doors, and yet up above that door, here is what you would see. You would see the beautiful carvings that are on the back side of the carvings on the exterior. So that's the rest of the interior of the Church of St. Hubert. Once you walk outside the church, this is your view. Off to the left, you go down to the corner to one of the main towers. This is where we'll be heading next to work our way around the outer fortress before heading into what's directly ahead of us, which is the main chateau of Charles VIII and Louis XII. And then this is the view up to the garden and where Leonardo was originally buried. And here's a medieval drawing of what this place looked like from this particular vantage point. And as you can see, a lot was torn down. Here's a nice drawing showing the palace area. And you see the red is what is there today. The gray is what has long since been torn down. Now, Leonardo was buried right here originally. And then, of course, obviously, he was then moved to the chapel of St. Hubert. So if you go to the palace area today, this is what you'll see where he was originally buried. They have this nice little monument to him. Next week, when we come in and look at our next section of the palace, we'll be going to the wall over here, and then we will go through most of the palace. So our intent for next week is the main palace, and then the third part will be the garden area and other outer buildings. Sherry and I hope you enjoyed the tour. Please come by our YouTube channel at Bob Packett, and please subscribe and leave some comments. Thank you very much. I've been doing podcasting on history for over 15 years. I've got over 4,000 shows, and I've done CDs, which of course can be sent out as USBs. So if you would really like to get more on history for free, then come by my website, as you see here, historyaccordingtobob.com, and see what's there. So thank you very much again.